Hello, and welcome back to a security breakdown. This is episode 2. My name's Jack,
I'm Matt.
and we're going to talk about security stuff and things.
Well introduced.
I hope.
So I think we agreed we were going to talk about standards, but some specific ideas about standards. They're obviously necessary, we know that, but we wondered, are there downsides to standardisation and what that might look like?
Yeah, I think the question for me is that is standard, working products to a standard actually stopping them from being as innovative as they could be? Is there a stifling of creative ideas in the security industry because everything is quite heavily regulated? Or is it that maybe we're not regulating enough and people are just going crazy and doing whatever they want?
Yeah, it's obviously something that's keenly interesting to us because our products and our industry are really heavily regulated. I think they're really heavily regulated, but I've not worked in any other industries to know.
Maybe
but
you've got nothing to compare.
Maybe I've got nothing to compare it to, but it feels like there's a lot of regulation around security products, and you'd expect that because the products and services are meant to protect people. So to give you an example, when I first joined the business in 1999, everything was governed by British standards then. And then obviously that's the security industry started getting co-opted into the European standardisation, and everything sort of built around that. So from my perspective, over that period of time, it just feels like a lot of different things have been standardised.
So does it feel like over the last 25 years, the standards have got more stringent and things are more regulated than they were?
I don't know about more stringent. There certainly are very prescribed requirements that the industry has to adhere to. There's just a lot. And I'll give you some really specific examples. So when I first entered the industry, the British standards for intruder alarms, I can't even remember what it was, but it was a British standard. I think it was BS 4737 was about intruder alarms. Nobody quote me on that because I can't quite remember. But then that got adopted into a pan-European standard. I think actually the British standard was the basis for the pan-European standard, which was the EN 50131, which became a suite of standards governing everything to do with intruder and hold-up alarm systems, or IHAS, as it was abbreviated to, which is fine. Okay, so all of that got adopted so that it would be a level playing field for products, so consumers could understand across Europe when they were buying that there was a set of requirements that had been tested and certified to. But just taking a step a little bit further back, before that, BS 4737 itself had another layer of standards put on top of it in Britain, because at the time, 96%, if I remember correctly, of all police responses to electronic intruder alarm activations were false alarms.
Oh.
96%.
Okay, so that's a clear benefit of
standardisation, different things being regulated and changed.
Making sure that things work properly.
That's right.
Is where you're looking at it as a standard point.
Yeah, 96% is quite high.
That's quite a lot of extra work that policemen have to do.
Yeah, you can see why they'd be a bit miffed about that.
Yeah, so
that
is one of the big benefits of standardisation and having standards in place, is that there's a minimum base level of quality of a product that you know that you're going to get.
Yeah.
You go out and you can buy any old intruder alarm, but as long as they're all complying with the same standard, you know that they're at least going to do the bare minimum of what you expect them to do. Yeah. They're not going to be totally garbage.
Well, actually, in that case, the standards actually did drive innovation. So the opposite of what the question was asking, did it hold back innovation? No, it drove innovation, because like you said, 96% of all police responses being in reaction to false alarms is a big issue. And the Association of Chief Police Officers, ACPO, they produced, in conjunction with industry, a set of guidelines about how intruder alarms must operate going forwards in order to be awarded a URN, a unique reference number. Without a URN or a unique reference number, they wouldn't attend anyway. You'd never get a police response. So they released a code of practice at the time, which was DD 243. So it then became, I think, if I'm right about BS 4737, you can tell I forgot to do my research.
There's a lot of numbers that you're saying that may not be right.
Yeah, the DD243 is definitely right. BS 4737, I'm not sure if I can remember that one correctly.
Nobody Googled.
Let's pretend it's BS 4737. So you had to comply with that from the manufacturing perspective, but then DD243 also introduced some new requirements. So it said things like 2 detectors had to trigger within 20 minutes before you could get a police response.
Yeah.
And also it asked for 2 methods of detector technology to reduce or to provide immunity to things like spiders crawling across lenses, triggering them. Yeah. So it's 2 detectors within 20 minutes had to trigger for a police response. If that 20-minute period expired, then
it resets.
It resets, exactly right.
Yeah. So I guess that brought the level of false alarms down.
It did. I mean, not as dramatically as you might think initially. It dropped, I think, within a year of introduction to 85%. But that 10% is still a massive win. And then over time, because things had to catch up to the level of the standard, the standards were issued, so all new systems moving forward would be compliant with that standard. But the old ones didn't automatically lose their police response straight away.
So if you think about it as in, if it's all new systems that are getting installed, not all of these new systems are going to be replacements for old systems.
Correct.
So that's more customers, therefore more police responses.
Yeah.
So actually to reduce from 96 to 85
it was a win.
If you doubled the number of intruder alarms, I'm not saying that's how many it was, but if you did, and then you dropped 11%, that's more than the 11% that you would have seen.
So actually, in that instance, standardisation created innovation because detectors had to be invented that had the dual types. So what we know as dual text today, infrared and microwave. And it also changed the way that the intruder alarms had to operate. So you couldn't signal when it was on the entry route. So if the entry time is running, you can't signal.
So that almost pretty much defined everything we now know as a normal intruder alarm and all the basic things that you expect. Like I was saying, everything that you did expect as a bare minimum, that's just how it is. And that's totally the norm now.
So for you entering the industry a long time after all of that happened, it's just like, well, this is how we do it.
Yeah.
And then that got, as I say, co-opted into EN 50131 Part 1. Now, this is where it starts getting a little bit, for me anyway, kind of like, well, are we making things overly complex? I don't think we are, but you could see how it might be viewed like that. So EN 50131 is a suite of standards. It starts with Part 1 that says how you have to manufacture the intruder alarm equipment and what it's got to do, how it's got to function. And then it runs through, and I think there's like 13 or maybe even more parts.
They're probably writing another one right now.
Probably are. So for us, security fob, we're Part 8. Then there's ones for how the alarm transmissions have got to be managed, how detectors have got to operate, times of signalling. Part 7 is application guidelines, so how the installers should behave. So they have to go out and do a survey and blah, 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 blah. That was well explained there, wasn't it? Blah, 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 blah. But you know what I mean.
I'll get it.
Yeah. So in theory, you comply with the EN 50131 suite, then you're good with any of the kit to enter any of the European markets, except you're not. That's the bit I'm getting at here.
Right.
So here in the UK, although I know we've left the EU now, but we still work with the EN 50131 suite. But even before any of the Brexit stuff, we took a look at it here in the UK and said, that doesn't meet the requirements of our existing British standards, so we're going to release a code of practice, PD 6662, which then tells you how you take EN 50131 and put it into
how do you understand the standard?
Right.
Instructions on how to read the instructions.
But then how is anyone meant to understand that? So you've now got 3 standards in operation in the UK. You've got DD243, EN 50131 and PD 6662, all of which must be complied with in order to get a police response. And it gets worse because you go to Germany and they've got their own code of practice for the European standard, VDS, whatever number it would be.
But all of these are, as a code of practice, a lot of the stuff that's going to be in here is going to be, suggestions and recommendations, right?
Yeah.
Things that you should be doing rather than things that you have to do. And as long as your product complies with the EN standard, you're going to get there eventually. What I'm thinking about now is, well, what if you're outside of the EU? What if you've got a totally different standard?
Yeah.
Or, I mean, if you haven't got one at all, you're fine because it doesn't really matter.
Mm.
You can't go wrong if there's nothing to go wrong against.
Mm.
But if you've got a totally different standard for, it could be anything, not just intruder alarm, but for electrical testing and for, how we have, what's it called, CE testing, things like that.
Crazily complex when you look at it on the global scale.
So if you're manufacturing an intruder product, you've got to either pick your market.
Yep.
Okay, I'm only going to be able to sell this in the EU or in countries that have no regulation that's going to be affected. Or I'm going to have to design this product so rigorously that either I'm able to sell it worldwide as a worldwide product, or I'm going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, however many different versions of it to suit different markets.
It's not realistic to do a single product and then... I mean, you can standardise it. I guess there must be a situation where, like, on the Venn diagram, all standards collide and there's a sweet spot where a product could slot in there.
Imagine how much development time and cost you'd have to put in to
crazy.
Get everything to work.
Just for the EN stuff, the costs are high. And I sometimes wonder, is it actually only the test houses that benefit from this kind of this level of rigor? Because the like I say, it's staggeringly expensive to test.
And it almost seems unfair, doesn't it? Because you think we have to make our products work in this way. Mm-hmm. We have to do it. You can't sell them if you don't. But they also have to be tested to prove that they work.
It's not just proving that they work, but that is really important. It's also proving they're safe.
Yeah.
And a really important aspect of standardization is it levels the playing field for the consumer. Mm-hmm. So the consumer can understand that they're going to buy something that's been tested, certified, gone through all the electrical safety tests that are required by... Because the European standards don't, with like 50131, it doesn't just look at the security aspect and how it's got to be used and how it's got to be made. It also references all the other directives like electrical safety, or if it's got pressure vessels or whatever, and that you've got to also comply with.
Fall apart if you have an earthquake,
for instance.
It's pretty unlikely here.
Yeah,
still have to do it though.
Still have to do it.
But you say it levels the playing field for the consumer.
Well, that's the spirit of standardization. It's meant to be for the consumer.
But what about the manufacturer? Because the manufacturing playing field isn't level. You've got companies that are multi-billion-dollar companies that can just throw R&D money down the tubes, until they get to the perfect product and they can sell it wherever they like. Or you've got a startup company, maybe they've had a brilliant idea, maybe it's something revolutionary in their field, doesn't have to be security, it could be anything. But they've got to research and development their product to match the standards, and then they have to get it tested, and that's a huge investment for a company that, as a small startup, might not have that money. And then where does it go? You can't get off the ground, and you don't have a new product.
So that's that bit about do we stifle potentially innovation? I think there is a case around that. When it gets to a certain point, you wonder how much of things are actually being put in place as market protectionism. So the existing players maintaining their position, because a lot of the standardization, to create a standard, you have to gather together a range of experts.
Yeah. Who's an expert in their field? The manufacturer.
Exactly. Yeah. So
they're just do they just make the standard fit with what they already make so that nobody else can make anything different?
Well, it wouldn't be surprising, would it?
It's unethical.
If there were agendas that were like that.
Yeah.
I've certainly seen instances where the creation of standards are, there's been difficulties in the creation of the standards because it has appeared that there may be ulterior motives or objectives or whatever. But then if you're in, from a manufacturer's perspective, if you've done all the investment, all the time, all the development, and then
you want to protect that.
And there are protections against those things anyway, because so a working group, certainly with the European norm, gets together with the experts. They write the standard together, when a consensus has been reached about how it should be, it then gets issued out to all the marketplaces for comment.
Okay.
And they can be vetoed. They'll get comments back. You need to address this. This doesn't work here. So it's a very lengthy process to even create one. So there are checks and balances, but you can imagine there would be attempts to create a position that's going to favour, whoever's commercially interested.
I'm thinking back to what you said right at the start, where the way that the standards were introduced in the 90s and 2000s for intruder alarms has completely defined how intruder alarms work now. Yep. So to the point where, like I say, me coming into the security industry later on can't even fathom it working in another way, because that's just how it's done.
It is, yeah.
But is that not the worst thing to say? That, we do it because this is how we've always done it. It's not how we've always done it, but it's how we've done it for the last 25 years.
Yeah, I suppose the ideal is, that period of time does describe the ideal creation of standards, because it addressed an issue that was real, that needed to be sorted out.
But now it's not changed for so long.
That's right, yeah.
And maybe there's
every 5 years they get reviewed and looked at, and is it still appropriate? But I guess what we're asking ourselves is, are there situations where a standard can actually actively inhibit a new technology just because it doesn't mean to do it, but it may cross over into that new technology's area? And in fact, I've seen this happen. I've absolutely seen this happen, and it's in our field. So we make security fog. There are other ways which we've actually done ourselves in the past of making a obscuring effect using pyrotechnics. We stopped doing it because we don't like it for very good reasons, but I'm not going to go into that. That's one of the reasons, yeah. But it's found favour in certain markets again, and until it hits a brick wall, which is, they say, well, it needs to comply with the security fog standard. And of course, a pyrotechnic cannot, because security fog is a completely different technology. But from a layman's perspective, they're doing the same thing. They're obscuring. So, and for the people that use pyrotechnics, the manufacturers, they have the devil's own job to try and get that a position where a new standard was created to cover their part of the technology and make a distinction and differentiation. And of course, for the consumer, that's important that they know they're buying a safe product, because without the standard there, well, you could, legally, you could buy things that hadn't been tested in that application.
You could sell whatever you want to whoever you want, and they would have no understanding and no recourse if they bought the wrong thing.
Or no obvious recourse anyway,
because they didn't know.
Correct, yeah.
Because there was no regulation. So, I mean, maybe we've come full circle. Maybe it is 6 of one and half dozen of the other. There is...
Well, I still think there's like fringe cases where, because I know that the journey for facial recognition has been tricky and challenging for obvious and good reasons, because people have got concerns about privacy, how it'll be used, what happens to the data, how's that all managed, and there are regulations that cover off parts of it, but the tech itself didn't have any regulation, and it slows that part of the industry down by not having the regulation there. But then are the cases where innovation that gets stymied, and I don't actually know.
You can almost look at the advent of facial recognition as a massive ramp up of development, because there was no regulation. They were trying as many things as they could and doing it in as many different ways and getting it as good as they possibly can before regulation came in. And then does it plateau after that point? And is there we get to the point where we go, okay, this is something that needs to be regulated, and it gets regulated, and then it just goes, cool, we're done now. That's how it is. And then are we stuck like that for the next 25 years? What are we missing that we don't know about? I guess that's my big question. It's probably something that we could never answer.
I don't know. I'm just thinking it through as we're talking, and I suppose it is all definitely consumer driven. Even the regulation standardisation is all consumer driven, because if there is some amazing new innovation and now you can detect intruders or something by telepathy, by implanting a chip in your brain, then if there was enough demand for it, that's when it starts getting pushed towards regulation and standardisation, because people want it and they want to know they're buying something safe, and then they'll say, well, we need to know it's safe, because consumers will just push back and say, we need to know it's safe.
You don't want to buying a product that especially if it's a chip in your brain. Where on earth do you get that from? It's like
could such a thing exist?
Yeah, but it would be terrifying to 99% of the population.
So they want to know it's safe, right? So I suppose we are just coming back full circle again that it doesn't stymie innovation. In fact, if innovation exists, it necessarily pushes towards a standardised place because no one will buy it unless they know it's
As
safe.
a product comes out of the fringe of development and into the public eye and into, being a marketable product, it's required by the consumer almost to be regulated.
You know where I think there is a genuine issue is in the marketing of the necessity of standardisation, but also it's kind of opaque. You heard me talking. You've got to comply with EN 50131, the whole suite. Yeah. You've got to, in this country, comply with DD 243, PV 662. In France, you've got to produce CMPP. In Holland, it's VVBO. In Germany, it's VAS. And that's just in Europe. We've not even got anywhere else yet.
Yeah, what if you wanted to sell it in the US?
It's completely different. It's
Australia.
UL over there.
Yeah.
I don't know Australia. I'd have to think hard about that.
I'm not sure.
No,
just dingoes.
Yeah. So I think that's where I think the real problem is. It's helping the consumers understand why the standards matter, and also simplifying it to make it really clear what the point of them is. So it's not just a case of where you get police response if you do it. It's creating the back understanding, because until I told you about where the current set of regs came from, did you know that story about the 96% of no, right?
No. But what you were doing there is you were telling a story that explained the existence of the regulation. So maybe that's something that the consumer is missing out on.
You know that thing we talked about in the past where there's a room with gorillas or chimps in it, and they've got a ladder. Ladder with bananas at the top. Every time they climb up, they get sprayed with not light bulb, bananas. Why would a chimp go after a light bulb?
I don't know. There's another idiom story thing. That's
maybe.
How many?
Anyway, the point is, eventually, all the original chimps get pulled out of the room and swapped with new ones that don't know why they're not allowed to get the bananas because the ones have been sprayed with water, but they carry on. And that's almost where we get with standardisation, isn't it? There's originally really good reasons. But as time moves on and people are changed out of the industry because they retire or whatever, and new people come through into the industry, those stories aren't necessarily passed on in a really clear way. Yeah. Because you didn't know. Mm. And it's only when I sat and thought about it that I remembered that 26 years ago, or whatever it was, a thing happened that made something else have a consequence. Yeah. And here we are today.
In that case, it was positive and well thought out and well received.
Well, the chances are most of the stuff is like that as well. But I think the bit that's missing is as the industry changes and new people enter the industry, we're not generating the same clear understanding that needs to be there to say this is why things are done like this.
We know that we have to make a standard, and that's the story. You just do it.
Yeah, you've got to comply with the standard. Yeah,
well, there isn't a standard.
This is the way it's done. Yeah, so get on with it. And that must be so frustrating for people entering the industry.
Yeah,
and I see that play out where people go, I've said it in the last episode. We've got a problem. We just want to get it solved. You know,
no, you're not allowed to solve it unless you've written a standard about it. Yeah, well, we haven't figured out how to solve it yet.
So yeah, I think that's where my main thrust is. That I've lost my thread. What is my main thrust? Help me quick.
Standards good.
We're doing a podcast. I forgot what I was saying.
Yeah. You put me right off then.
Oh, sorry.
No, I think that your main thrust, as I understood it, was that we need standards to be able to protect the consumer.
Yeah.
Right. But we also need to allow innovation to a certain point so that we can have new products and we can have new developments so that we can see those vast improvements. And I think a really interesting part was how telling the story of why a standard exists is a powerful tool to help a consumer understand why they're buying the product that they're buying in the first place.
I wonder also, is there a way that issues, because when standards are written, it will probably seem clear at the time, but it's only when you operate them that you find out if there's actually some problems, because there's no such thing as a perfect process, right?
No, especially if it's 12 men sitting in a boardroom thinking about it.
Yeah.
Like we think,
which is pretty much the way it's done.
We think it should happen like this, and then when you put it into practice, it could be totally different. It might not work. So there has to be that. I mean, the standards need to be innovated.
Yeah, I suppose. I wonder if there's like a fast track way of doing things. And maybe, well, I probably don't know. Maybe it exists because the other thing in the security industry is things can change really, really quick. You know, there can be new modes of attack, new threats.
Yeah.
And that's where innovation is really, really important, you know.
And if it's stuck behind a paywall of testing and standards, then we're missing out on more
potentially
security.
Good solutions.
Yeah.
Be interesting to hear what everybody else has got to think on this one. It's a bit of a dry topic, but it's really important, you know.
Well, it wasn't that dry. There was monkeys.
Yeah, light bulbs, bananas. Forgotten halfway through what we're saying. Stuff.
Yeah, that's
all that.
That's literally the bingo card. Podcast content.
Yeah. What are we going for on the next podcast?
Well, I think the next one sort of follows on a little bit from this one, and I want to dig a bit deeper into if security can go too far.
Oh, right.
So, like the idea of the nanny state watching
1984
with all the I think I read somewhere London is like the most watched city in the world, just by sheer force of CCTV everywhere. So I think that.
I think we're the most watched country in the world, aren't we?
You might be right.
I think there was a stat 20 odd years ago that you got photographed on average. The average UK person got photographed 300 times a day.
Well, you get more than that because of all your speeding tickets.
I don't speed. I can't see far enough anymore to speed. So
fair dues. I think that would be an interesting topic to talk about. Like, are we taking security too far, and is innovation security opening us to privacy issues and things that aren't necessarily that good and healthy for us, or is it not far enough? There's more that could be done where crime can be reduced and people could be safer and happier and
sounds like
secure.
A deep topic.
That's the idea.
But as per last time, we want to hear from you on your views on what we're going to talk about, what we've talked about today. And I want to thank people for the feedback they gave us from last time. Some of the feedback was get a sign, which we haven't done yet, but we will.
We'll fix it in post.
Yeah, have coffee cups. We got coffee cups. Yeah. And look, new stuff. But that wasn't from feedback. That's just because we wanted them.
Because the other ones were annoying.
They were rubbish. Yeah. Anyway, that's it.
Thanks for watching and or listening. And we'll see you at the end of whatever the next month is. July.
Yeah. Thank you.